So let's just say, purely hypothetically, that you were thinking about rerolling as a melee DPS. I'm saying hypothetically because obviously nobody playing tank or healer would reroll, surely, right? I believe it's even been outlawed in certain countries. With good reason, these people should be hanged for what they did. So, hypothetically, of course, you were thinking about rerolling to melee DPS. Now, you don't know much about melee DPS, you have played ranged your entire World of Warcraft life, or you're played tank, you're played healer, you're not quite sure what they do. So, let's try to categorize some of the more interesting ones I played, and I think that fit these categorization the best. Are you interested in doing direct damage? No dots, no upkeep of buffs, just plain old press your buttons, do your damage and you're done. Are you interested in having more setup, setting up your buffs, the enemy debuffs for bigger hits? And how about burst? Maybe you don't want burst, maybe you want sustained damage, maybe you do want burst. How about utility? How about specs that have a builder spender type of rotation and specs that have a priority system? Right now I'm going to list the melee DPS that I found more interesting, playing the beta, playing Mythic Plus, and please be warned that this doesn't mean these are the most OP. I have intentionally left out even a couple that are actually particularly good right now in DPS, not in the way they function, which is exactly the point of this video. Windwalker Monk, for example, as well as Frost Mage in the range DPS video I will be making, are essentially busted in numbers, but that's not the point of this video. So let's go on and look at what melee DPS class is the right one for your style. Aizen, I don't want my DPS to depend on conditionals. I don't want to base my DPS on debuffs on the target, dots on the target, buffs on myself, multiple intricate rotations to pull off the right play. I just want my Neanderthal style, press button, do damage, and be done with it. Okay, if you like that style, then you can play Retribution, Paladin, and Havoc Demon Hunter. They are basically the classes that rely the least on DOTs, debuffs, and buffs on themselves. Red Paladin essentially has no debuffs to put on the target and no dots. You know, they're basically just a click and do damage, and that's it. And Havoc is similar. Havoc is just very little DOT and debuffs on the target that they need to play around, so it's just pure button pressing, really. But no, Aizen, I'm his brother and I want the exact opposite, because I'm a little bitch. I want to be a 300 IQ master strategist who sets up his play, his debuffs on the target, his dots, and then buffs on myself, and then pull off this huge damage. Okay, so for that style, you can play Enhancement Shaman, Subtlety Rogue, as well as kind of Unholy DK. When it comes to setup, I'm talking about essentially how many things do you have to look at. Paladin has Blade of Justice off cooldown, he presses it. Judgment is off cooldown, he presses it. Now he has 3 Holy Power and he uses Templar's Verdict. That's basically all there is. If you're Enhancement, you have to play around the duration of your Flame Shock. If there are multiple targets, you have to spread your Flame Shock. You have to look at your Maelstrom stacks. You have to consume your Maelstrom stacks. You also have to time your Maelstrom stacks, because your Maelstrom stack reset the cooldown of your Storm Strike. So you want to use Storm Strike before using your Maelstrom stack, so you will gain maximum benefit from resetting the cooldown. You can also play with certain legendaries which are going to make your Frost Shock hit mega hard every once in a while, that you need to keep track on. And this is something that is actually slightly annoying in Mythic Plus. You also have to constantly reposition your Wind Fury totem whenever you move, pull to pull. So it has a lot of things to keep track of compared to these specs. And Subtlety is similar. Subtlety has debuffs to put on the target, not just Rupture, the renamed, really, DOT that they're gonna have in Shadowlands. Not just Rupture, but also Find Weakness, which is now essentially a buff they need to try to maintain when they are using their burst. They still have, of course, Symbol of Death to use in their window of DPS, and then, of course, they have Shadowlands, where everything is going to revolve around. And the planning is not just in the form of the abilities for Subtlety, but also in the form of resource. They have to pool their energy ready for their big burst window. So it's much more maintenance required compared to Ret and Havoc. I mentioned slightly Unholy because Unholy also has some setup that they need to have. They need to maintain not just runic power, but also, of course, their runes, and then they need to maintain their Festering Wounds, or spread their Festering Wounds and then burst their Festering Wounds. So that's slightly similar to these two specs. And this is for just how direct or how strategical do you want the approach of your spec as a melee DPS. Oh, thank you, Aizen, that was pretty informative, but I have another problem, actually. I don't care about how direct my damage is or how much setup do I need. My problem is that I mained Shadow Priest in Warlords of Draenor, and then I mained Assassination Rogue in Legion, and then I mained Balance Druid in BFA. I'm sick and fucking tired of not having any burst. I'm sick and tired of always having to see other specs waving their big dick around when there is some burst to be had, and I'm just sitting back with my cooldown that lasts 30 seconds and all the mobs are dead before I even get to ramp up, and I'm always cucked of damage. I just want to be able to do some burst, okay? I just want to be able to see big damages on the meters and be recognized by other people and not just laughed at when it comes to burst. Okay, if you want burst, then play Red Paladin. Red Paladin has still, you know, not just one of the highest bursts, but is the more dynamic. It's not much about single target burst or AoE burst or cleave burst. You know, it's one for everything. And now they have even more options compared to BFA. There are two other traits for burst. And AoE burst, Imperium Power, and Light Decree are basically cooked in their kit. They have been given another burst cooldown in Final Reckoning. They have been given the Holy Paladin's version of more burst, Holy Avenger, and Seraphim, the one from Prot Paladin, just in case they want to stack up their burst even more. Another, mention we could do to Enhancement Shaman. Enhancement Shaman also has ways to have a lot of burst. They still have a lot of burst right now in BFA, and they can have even more in Shadowlands, as well as Unholy DK, although Unholy's burst is more related to, numbers. If you were on the opposite, honestly, I don't know many people on the opposite side of this fence, but if you don't like burst and you just want a stable spec that does stable damage all around, then you can play Assassination Rogue. That's gonna be perfect for you. Who are more interested in the holistic approach to a spec, please look up what holistic means. For the people who are more interested about how the rotation actually works. Is it a builder spender? Is it a builder spender with some extra procs? Is it a priority system that without a clear leading protagonist in the whole payoff of the build, etc, etc. They don't care much about how direct is their damage, how much setup do they need, if they have burst, but more around, do they have burst, but is it actually fun to play? Do they have direct damage, but is it a rotation or a priority system? So if you prefer builder spenders, okay, if you come from, a Prot Paladin with Holy Power, for example, if you come from even, a Blood DK with runes and runic power, even if you come from a healer, maybe something like a Discipline Priest that can see something like Atonement being your builder and the actual heal of tagging people with Atonement being your spender. If you come from range, then you have like Balanced Druid style of builder spender with Astral Power, or maybe a more clean builder spender like Warlock with Soul Shards, or a more mixed one with Elemental Shaman and Maelstrom. So if you just want a builder spender, a clean builder spender, then you go Sub-Rogue and Rogue in general and Retribution Paladin. Sub-Rogue, of course, is very clean. You build combo points with your backstab, or rather you don't want to, actually. You build them with Shadow Strike, and then you dump them with your Eviscerate, with your Shadow Vault, with your Rapture, and then you go again. It's a very straightforward one. Retribution is the same. Retribution has, Crusader Strike, Judgment, Blade of Justice, eventually Hammer of Wrath, and then you dump it with Templar's Verdict on single target and Divine Storm on AoE. Very, very simple. Very clean, very straightforward. No other options really, no other legendary that empowers a random ability that they never use. Same for Rogue really. On the opposite side, you have specs that are more diverse, specs that focus on multiple things, not just your builder spender, like Enhancement Shaman and Unholy DK. Unholy DK as a builder spender because they can build runic power and spend runic power, but then they can also build or regenerate runes and then spend runes, but then they can also build festering wounds and then blow up the festering wounds. So they do have a builder spender, but they have so many spread builder spenders that it makes it diverse, if it makes sense. Enhancement Shaman is similar in the sense that you do build Maelstrom stacks and you consume Maelstrom stacks with Lightning Bolt or Chain Lightning, but then you also have to take care of your Storm Strike, which has also a chance to reset on its own. You also have to use Lava Lash, you also have to use your Flame Shock on multiple targets to spread, or you can use Frost Shock. You have to decide on that. There are multiple things that you have to take care of, as well as a mention to Havoc Demon Hunter. Havoc Demon Hunter, for as simple as it is, for as 2-button presses as it is, the builder spender of Havoc is rather mixed in the sense that the spender is not really the big finisher of Havoc. It never feels fine to dump your entire bar of Fury or Rage in Chaos Strike, because Chaos Strike sucks balls and people don't like to use Chaos Strike. So that's also a different one than Sub and Ret, which are very straightforward. And this is for your style on how you enjoy to play a spec, rather than how exactly do you do damage, your damage type, your damage profile. This is more about a rotation preference. And lastly, we're going to have our low IQ versus high IQ specs to choose from, because when we mention doing damage directly, doing damage with setup, or doing damage in burst, or doing damage with a builder spender or with a priority system, doesn't really refer to how difficult or how complicated the spec actually is. Obviously, if a spec requires setup, it can be more difficult than a spec that's direct, but not always. So some of the simplest specs you can play, of course, there is still Havoc. Demon Hunter is going to be always there. I'm pretty sure Blizzard is intent on leaving Demon Hunter always there. It's, you know, one of the simplest one. You have extremely low amount of buttons to press. As I mentioned, you already have no dots or debuffs or buffs that you need to take care of, so it's very simple. A little mention that right now there's a build on the beta where the Fell Rush and the Momentum build is back. So adding Vengeful Retreat and Fell Rush into the rotation, as well as timing properly when you use Immolate with this legendary, is actually going to make the spec quite setup heavy actually. So if that ends up going live, Havoc could actually considerably change as a spec in the way it's played. But for now, we're just gonna assume it's BFA Havoc and you play in the same way in the beta. Then it's very, very simple. Unholy DK gets the other spot for the low IQ spec. Very, very few buttons. You have your Festering Strike and your Scourge Strike to clean off your wounds, and then you put down Death and Decay on top of the mobs, and you dump your runic power with Epidemic or Death Coil for AoE your single target. That's it. It's like 5 buttons. It's not very difficult, it's not very complicated. On the opposite side, for the high IQ setups, you have Sub Rogue and Enhancement Shaman. As I mentioned, Enhancement Shaman can be made harder with a couple of talents, and especially one of the legendaries, the Frost Witch for the Frost Shock Empowerment, which is gonna add another button to press. And Sub, of course, you know, the whole thing about subtlety is that you do fuck all until you have reached your Shadow Dance window, you pulled your energy, your combo points, and you go into Shadow Dance, and then you go back, rolling your thumbs, waiting. So it requires setup, you know, it requires lining up of multiple abilities, multiple buffs on yourself, and debuff on the enemy. So it requires more thinking. You can't just press random buttons like you could as a Havoc or even a Red Paladin. Those are for the ones who want to get a bigger payoff, who want to feel like they did something that was more complicated and the payoff is going to be better for them. We conclude our Melee DPS Symposium. These were the specs that I found were more deserving of their niche when it comes to whichever niche you want. Direct damage, you know, setup, burst, whatever. Of course, there are other specs that I've not mentioned, simply because I don't think they fit as well as these do. You know, burst, you have Rat, but you also have Windwalker. When it comes to setup in DPS, of course, you still have Feral Druid, as well as high IQ. Feral Druid is still there. Okay, I just wanted to mention a few. I don't want to make an entire fucking encyclopedia of all specs in the game. These are just the most interesting one to me that I think are more fitting of their particular niche. Next up, I'm going to be making the ranged one. Similar fashion, I'm going to pick 5 or 6, maybe 7 specs to illustrate in which niche do they fit, which type of playstyle you want to go for, and which one is going to be right for you with these specs. And also please remember that, again, this is purely rhetorical. We all know you're playing healer or tank in Shadowlands, so this is just a what-if scenario. Nobody is actually going to play a melee DPS in Shadowlands, so thank you.